I'm here.
Are we ready to start? All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I wanted to say good evening. My name is Kathy Jones, the president of the League of Women Voters of Alabama. And it is my pleasure to welcome you and to extend our warmest greetings to the candidates, the audience, both here at Farley Auditorium as well as online, and also to the media who has joined us tonight for our League of Women Voters of Alabama 2022 Secretary of State Primary Candidate Forum. We're holding this event at the Farley Auditorium in the beautiful Alabama Department of Archives and History in Montgomery, Alabama. And just to let you understand where it's situated, we're looking across the street at the state capitol and also at the State House, where all of the business of the state is for the Senate representatives meet during the winter and spring. Tonight's primary election forum is for the Republican primary candidates who are competing to become the Secretary of State of Alabama. This live event is being streamed across the state on the League of Women Voters of Alabama Facebook and YouTube channels. And it's an unprecedented opportunity for you to get to know the candidates and their positions ahead of the May 24th primary election. Our moderator will introduce you to the candidates in just a moment, but I wanted to point out that the winner of this GOP Secretary of State primary election will face the Democratic Party's candidate, Ms. Pam Lafitte, in the general election on November the 8th. Voters always benefit when they can learn firsthand from candidates about their positions and their values. And we believe that the Secretary of State election is one of the most consequential for Alabama this year. The Alabama Chief Elections Official, the Secretary of State is the chief elections official for all of Alabama. And that person is required by law to protect and ensure voting rights for every eligible citizen. And they're required to provide fair, accessible, and secure elections. And they serve on or appoint members to numerous boards and committees which are directly related to voting. Take what you learned tonight and use that to make your decisions when you go to the ballot box. I want to take a moment also to thank the team who has worked so hard to bring you this event. And I want to thank League members Pam Caruso and Pat King for their expert planning and coordination. Anisha Hardy, Kendra Majors Love, and Kevin Crook, Alabama Values Progress, and Emery Kidd, who has joined us to do the sound for tonight. And they are, this Alabama Values Progress and Emery are doing our technical production and the live stream. And of course, I must express our deep gratitude to the Alabama Department of Archives and History, who have allowed us to have this event here tonight in the Farley Auditorium. And finally, it is my honor to introduce the moderator for tonight's event, Dr. Marisa Grayson, Associate Professor and University Pre-Law Advisor at the Department of Political Science at Samford University. Dr. Grayson began teaching political science at Samford in August of 2010, Before coming to Sanford, she has served as Director of Debate at the University of Florida and taught classes in public speaking and public leadership. And I'm excited about what we're going to hear tonight. It's a great event.
Great, thank you. It is an honor to be here tonight at the League of Women Voters of Alabama Forum for the GOP primary, the May 24th Republican primary for the Secretary of State. And we are honored to have both Mr. Christian Horn and Mr. Ed Packard here for the forum. I want to go over the rules, I guess, for the forum tonight with everyone have agreed to these rules before we begin. So first, the candidates will speak in alphabetical order for their opening comments. They'll have 2 minutes, and then I have a list of questions that we would like both candidates to answer. They will have about 1.5 minutes to answer those questions. Should I ask a follow-up question, they will have 30 seconds to respond to that follow-up question. We will then, if there's time, take questions both from the live audience as well as the live stream. And there's the opportunity to type those questions in should you be watching the live stream right now. And then it's important the candidates get to have the last word, so we'll make sure to leave time for them to have 2 minutes to make a closing argument. So with that, I'm going to allow our candidates to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Mr. Christian Horn.
Thank you so very much for the invitation. Thank you so very much for your attendance. I am the great-great-great-grandson of those who arrived here many, many generations ago. I come from the community, the last slave ship in America, the Clotilda. And from that starting point, my family migrated through the Black Belt into the Selma area. My hope is to be the dream of those who once upon a time served our country, and when they came home, they could not defeat Jim Crow. I seek this position because so many others sought the ability to vote at the ballot box, whether they were free, whether they were enslaved, whether they were a woman, or whether they were poor. This position is more deeply about the people of Alabama. It is more deeply about the promise that we've made to the people of Alabama to protect their vote, not just yesterday, not just today, but tomorrow. I'm an outsider. I'm someone who has a conservative view of the world. I believe that we should honor our relatives and our ancestors who used to get up and put on hats and ties and stand on line because they were so proud to be an American, to vote. And because of that, because of the ability to arise from the bottom of the slave ship and to go to the top of the state where the Apollo stands, the great rocket ship, in 5 generations, I sit here today to be the next Secretary of State of this great state of Alabama. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Packard?
Good evening. Thank you very much for being here tonight in person or watching it on the live stream. We appreciate everyone who's watching either in person or over the internet. Thank the League of Women Voters for inviting us to this event. I also appreciate the media being here so that they can provide coverage to their viewers on their TV stations. I'm the son of a military veteran. My father was in the Air Force for 20 years. I really enjoyed growing up in that environment, but it was a very important environment because that's where I learned the foundation for my character and my personality. I learned my ethics, my sense of integrity, my sense of responsibility from my father and the other people that he worked with in the military before he retired. Voting is very important to us here in America and in Alabama. Our form of government is based on the fundamental participation of the people of Alabama, of proud Americans who go to vote and participate in government in other ways as well. I've been working in elections in Alabama for 30 years. I was with the Secretary of State's office for almost 25 years, serving the public, the voters, candidates the county election officials and my fellow state election officials, as well as municipal election officials, ensuring that people knew what they could do, how they could do it when it comes to voting, ensuring that election officials knew what they needed to do to properly administer elections for all of us who are voters here in Alabama. So I put myself forward this year as a candidate for Secretary of State so that I can continue what has been 25 plus years of service to the people of Alabama, helping y'all make democracy a reality here in the state of Alabama. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you both. Our first question relates to what you've talked about, the importance of voting and the importance of the job. So the Secretary of State has far-reaching responsibilities, from Chief Elections Officer to processing and filing public records. What do you see as the three most important roles of Secretary of State? And Mr. Packard, I'll let you go first.
Well, the three most important roles of the Secretary of State would be, one, is the role of Chief Election Official in the state of Alabama, ensuring that we have good, honest elections that people can have confidence in, and elections that have integrity. I would say that's number one, although there are many other important things in the office. That is the foundation for our system of government here in the state of Alabama, as well as America as a whole. Secondly, the role that the Secretary of State plays in the business community in terms of getting businesses registered to conduct business in the state of Alabama in general. Also, the role regarding trademarks and those sorts of things. That's very important to support the business community so that they can conduct their services here in the state of Alabama. The third area that I would say is probably the third most important is the role dealing with authentications, which is where the role of the Secretary of State's office in handling and helping and assisting with international adoptions. The Secretary of State plays a key role helping people who want to adopt children from other countries be able to fulfill that dream to build their family here in Alabama and in America. So those are the three things that I would say are the most important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad people are learning just how important this position is and how much it encompasses. We'd love to hear from Mr. Horn about the three most important roles of Secretary of State under your eye.
I believe that the Secretary of State, as the Chief Election Officer, must protect each and every vote. They must protect the access to the vote, and they must protect the education of the voter. That opportunity wrapped into security, integrity, means auditing as well. The second piece that I believe is important to the Secretary of State office is being the Chief Business Officer. From Huntsville, Alabama, we're the shining star of the state. We're bringing in billions of dollars, small companies and large, from Toyota to Mazda to all the other companies that want to feed off of our defense industry. We need a Secretary of State that understands business so that we can go forward and be the front door for small businesses, those who want to start a mom and pop store, who want to get help doing it, those who are seeking funding, those who want to be able to just set up and not be so confused. The third thing that I believe is most important for the Secretary of State is to be the face of the state in partnership with the governor and lieutenant governor. I believe that it's our goal to make certain that this state is the most historical state of voting in the world. This state is the crown jewel of freedom, liberty, and democracy. And telling that story and allowing people from around the world to enjoy our archives, our legacy traditions, our famous bridge at Selma and around the state is very important. So being that face of the state is critical. Thank you.
Great, well, I'm glad that you mentioned access to voting because the next question deals with that issue. The question is as follows. The following populations say that they have difficulties participating in the elections process: the blind, poor, out-of-area college students, mobility challenged, and homeless. What would you do to ensure that individuals who fit these categories can be better accommodated? And I'll let Mr. Hunt start.
I think I've been a part of those marginalized communities at one part of my life. Certainly I've been a student. Certainly I understand what it means means to be a descendant of slavery in the state. Certainly understand what it means to be disabled. I am a survivor of an aneurysm. I was paralyzed from the neck down 5 years ago. Could not talk, could not walk. So I'm a special candidate because I remember the time that I wanted to get to the polls and I could not. I remember the time when I needed information and I had to call in on the line and get that help that I needed. So the first thing a Secretary of State must not be bureaucratic, but they must lead from the heart. They must have a heart to hear the concerns of those people, my people, and those communities that I've been a part of, and certainly be able to listen to the organizations that represent their interests and have an open door. But it's a heart-based leadership. It's a servant-based leadership where I know that those communities know that it's not about me. It's about we. It's about all of us, and understanding that voting does not have a color, does not have a gender, it does not have an ability challenge. And I will do everything I can because I've been in that circumstance. And I want to make certain that everyone has access to the polls without attacks, without impediment, and with a sense of liberty and freedom that they've served their state and their country. Thank you.
Mr. Horn? Mr. Packard, I apologize.
Well, there are a number of very important groups or people that have had significant problems voting over the years. Another group that I would add to your list are particularly women who have been victims of domestic violence. Until a few years ago, there were women that gave up their right to vote because they found out that the Secretary of State's office under state law has to sell their information to anybody willing to buy it. That applies to all of us. They sell our name, our address, our mailing address, our date of birth. They sell all of that information, and when women who had been victims of domestic violence found out about that, they would tell me, they told me on multiple times that they couldn't vote because of that. Luckily, because they didn't want anyone to find them, they didn't want to know where they were. So luckily the legislature a few years ago carved out an exception to where their information is protected. What I would do is, I've already been working with the National Federation of the Blind here in Alabama. I've been working with the Alabama Disabilities Advocacy Program over at the University of Alabama to work on legislation to make voting for people with disabilities easier. And what I have put out ever since I got involved in this race back in December is that we should allow those individuals who are disabled to vote the same way we allow overseas military and U.S. citizens to vote, and that is electronically from the comfort of their home. I don't believe we should make that available to voters in general because there's security issues, but we should make electronic voting for people with disabilities a reality. Thank you.
Mr. Horn, would you also agree to those changes? Do you support that policy change?
I think that what he's speaking to, that changes have already been made. I think absolutely that women and men, especially women who are in fear, especially those who don't want to have their names published because they're in fear of being attacked or be attacked. I think that's very critical. It's very important. So I absolutely agree that it is our duty to protect the people who feel marginalized. I think that's critically important. And again, as someone who has been absolutely challenged, not being able to have the physical ability to make certain that whatever we may need to do to ensure those that cannot get access to the poll, that they are properly registered and properly understood that they have that challenge. Solve it.
Thank you. All right, so the next question, and we'll start with Mr. Packard, is what is your position on no excuse absentee voting versus early voting in Alabama?
Well, no excuse absentee voting, as the name suggests, is a form of absentee voting where you do not have to provide any kind of reason. You merely apply for the ballot and it's sent to you. It's very much akin to early voting, where in states that have early voting, they set up polling locations some period of time before the election. Sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's a month. I'm not in favor of any of that. I believe that as a community, we should vote in person at our polling place if we can. For those people who are unable to, for various reasons, absentee voting is a fine alternative for them. You know, if you're sick if you expect to be sick near election day, or you are sick near election day, you work a shift of 10 hours or more that corresponds with polling hours, you have a death in the family near the election, you can vote an emergency absentee ballot for that so that you can go to the funeral. I believe that to support our community and our sense of community, we do need in-person voting. We do not need early voting or no excuse absentee where it's just done willy-nilly from home. I just feel very strongly that particularly in this day and time where our sense of community seems to be shattering or fracturing all the time, we need to do things that build that community, not further divide it or allow for it to be divided.
Mr. Horn, what is your position on no excuse absentee voting versus early voting in Alabama?
I believe there's a rich heritage and tradition in this state that my grandmother and my mother, many of yours had, especially after 1965 when we were able to vote, all of us. I believe that there was a tradition, as I spoke to earlier, of getting up early on vote day. It was a special time for me to see my grandfather put on a top hat, top coat, and it was like going to church. Because people in this state at one time understood how sanctified it was just to vote, especially those who are African Americans. So for our community, it is not just an opportunity to phone it in. What it is a sense of not just community, but a sense of village, a sense of pride. It's a sense to the monument that was put together at Selma's Bridge, that those men and women were beat by dogs, that were beaten, just so that you can stand online and vote. I honored it so much that even when I was coming out of my disability, being able to walk, I would walk on vote day because I know how precious it was to be there online and to honor those men and women from the community I come from. I want Alabama to know it's critical that we stand online and we vote.
So I heard Mr. Packard say he does not support no excuse absentee voting or early voting. Is it fair to say you do not support either one of those things as well?
I believe I agree with Ed in terms of our very conservative way of looking at that. I think that people, if they're going to have an excuse, for instance, my elderly mom, 80 years old, and I have other family members that cannot get out of the house or who are still afraid of the house to come out because of COVID. We need to make exceptions that are rare and exceptional, that we're able to do something to that. Otherwise, we open the floodgates and we don't stick to our norms of our state.
To follow up, and I'll let Mr. Packard go first, are there any changes to our absentee voting policies that need to be made to ensure that there's access to the ballot?
Well, the main change that I would see that we need, and I've already mentioned this in the other question, is that we should have absentee voting for people with disabilities who are homebound or have difficulty traveling to the polls, or maybe they have polling places in their county that are just not accessible to them. We need to have electronic voting for people with disabilities, just like we do for the military who are overseas and U.S. citizens who are overseas.
Mr. Horn?
I think that we must look first from Huntsville, Alabama, Redstone Marshall. I was a military kid also, grew up in a foreign country. My mother and father had to vote in terms of overseas. I think it's important that that mechanism of voting that serves our troops who are serving overseas and can't get back home. I agree wholeheartedly that we must protect that system. And as our technology grows and we get more into cryptography and understanding the power and the secrecy of the ballot, then we can talk many years from now. But for right now, we need to be very conservative in our approach.
Great, thank you. In the Milligan versus Secretary of State Merrill lawsuit, the Supreme Court allowed Alabama to proceed with the 2022 elections using the state's congressional map that was passed in November until the Supreme Court is able to review the lower court's decision that the maps violate Section 2 of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Alabama's Black population represents more than 25% of the state's population, but the congressional map that was passed in November only has one minority majority district. How will you ensure that every person's vote counts equally and that Alabama is compliant with federal laws? And Mr. Horn, you can go first.
As I said earlier, I'm always going to be sensitive to a community that's been marginalized in the voting process of this state. So for me, I'm always want people to have equal access and equal representation. But the reality is that the Supreme Court made the law. I watched that case very, very closely to see exactly what would happen if we added a seat or whether or not a seat would be taken away. Regardless of how I see things, in the demographics in the next 8 years are going to change again. Those numbers are going to go up. And so not within our lifetime, God's grace, we'll probably see more seats, and doing so in a way that's geographical, that's demographics, not just strictly based on race. We have populations here that are Hispanic communities growing. We have multiracial populations. But I'm always sensitive that our demographics are changing. And within the next 8 years or so, we'll have to revisit that issue again.
Thank you. Mr. Packard?
The Alabama legislature is the body that determines what laws we operate by and that govern our elections. That's also the body that determines the congressional district lines as well as other district lines at the state and federal level, such as your state house districts, state senate districts, and state school board districts. I believe that the Secretary of State is the chief elections official, and what I would do as Secretary of State would be to work with the legislature to ensure that they pass good legislation that does not violate anyone's voting rights or suppress the vote in any manner. Now, once the legislature passes those laws or those district lines, then we are in a position to have to implement those as best we can under the law. And that's what we do as election administrators. And so we have to be cognizant of the impact that these laws might have on people and find ways to implement them so that they do not suppress the vote or endanger anyone's right to vote. Now, in terms of the congressional district line case, what the Supreme Court said was, we just need to put this off to another day, that the legislature didn't need to make changes or the court didn't need to make changes so close to an election and disrupt the process. And I'm fully supportive of the fact that we should not make any changes close to an election or once the election time starts.
Thank you. Speaking of making changes close to an election, I want to talk about how we keep an accurate roll for each election. So it's understood that election officials are required by law to maintain an accurate voter roll for each election. So how do you balance election access and election security to ensure that citizens are not erroneously removed from voter rolls and thus a person's vote would not count? And Mr. Packard, we'll start with you.
Well, one of the key aspects of administering voter registration in the state of Alabama is that we inform the public as to the requirements to be able to register to vote and to update the registration when they move so that we can keep the records accurate in the system. We also have provisions in state law where the Department of Public Health provides information about people who are deceased so that the boards of registrars can remove them. We get information from National Change of Address. We get information from the Social Security Master Death Index for people who died out of state. We also get information from other states as to people from Alabama who moved elsewhere. This is all under what's called the ERIC program, which you may have heard about. It's the Electronic Registration Information Center, of which 31 states are members, and we get that information so that we can help keep the rolls clean. What's important is that our registrars do their job correctly. My start in election administration in Alabama was working with the boards of registrars across the state, making sure they knew what their responsibilities were. They're the ones that need to make sure they're processing the information that's given to them so that the voter lists are clean and up to date without denying anybody inaccurately their right to vote.
Mr. Horn?
So let's start there. I believe that this is one of the areas that we can have vast improvement upon. Being from Huntsville, engineering is solving problems. We put a man on the moon. We know how to solve problems. We develop our defense systems. We know how to solve tough problems. And one of the things that my experience has been, especially on the software side, is that we actually need to do a much better job of having real-time databases, of being able to have our own state of Alabama database that keeps real-time information from some of the databases that he mentioned. When someone dies, it needs to be in real time. We need to become faster, we need to be stronger, and easier access to that information. There are people moving into the state of Alabama every day. North Alabama and South Alabama specifically have a tough time being able to keep up with the registrars. People come in, they may not register, they may think they can vote. We have to keep in constant contact. It'd be cool if every voter in this state, when they got their driver's license, got an email address so that we can at least reach out to the Secretary of State to let them know, here's how you do it, here's where you do it, here's when you do it. That's very simple. So we have some very tough problems, but we have some easy solutions, which is trying to find the best ways to keep in contact, whether someone's been put away, or someone has passed away, or someone has moved away. We need to do a better job of using our technology to have that information in real time and put it at a touch point where people can go on and see it. They can see it now, but we can always make it better. And I believe that our team will be able to do that.
Mr. Packard, do you support switching to or adopting a real-time Alabama-specific voter roll?
Where we can, I certainly do support that. When people pass away, unfortunately, there's a lot of bureaucracy that goes behind the scenes when someone is deceased. It takes a little time for public health to collect that information and pass it over to us. We also don't get the information from other states automatically. If someone from Auburn dies in Columbus, or someone from Fort Payne dies in Chattanooga, or someone from Western Alabama dies over in Mississippi, we don't know that.
Great, thank you. I'm glad that you're talking about communicating with voters, because it's clearly very important. It seems like citizens use traditional mail less and less. So voter notifications of changes of poll location, voter rolls, as you've mentioned, and new and or changed districts need to obviously be communicated to voters. So how open, and I'll start with Mr. Horn, how open are you to new methods to communicate with voters? So things like social media, voter notifications, or just how can we better communicate with voters?
Well, there's no doubt that I'm definitely the digital guy for sure in this election. I believe that we need to use every platform we can to reach our voters, or those who want to participate in votes, including high school students who are about to vote, college students who come in from other states who don't know who, what, when, where until they get to the polls and they end up having their feelings hurt because they can't vote. So we need to reach this next generation on the platforms that they actually live, work, and play on. We can't think about just that platform, but we still need to go old school, as you say. I would love very much, last week I got a call from someone who said, hey, listen, we still need to have voter rolls in the paper, the newspaper. And they should be free at churches, at YMCAs, at senior homes. If people want to check that roll in their county, we need to be able to work with the county, make sure that they can go and get a free listing to see whether or not they're on or not. But new technology is where we need to go to make certain that people are at the touch points, and then have respect for the old technology, which is a simple free newspaper listing. Right now, if you want to see a free newspaper listing of the rolls, you may have to be a subscriber. And sometimes poor and impoverished people don't want to subscribe to a newspaper. But when it comes down to using platforms, whether it's simple platforms such as email, how about that? Simple platforms such as peer-to-peer texting, how about that? And want to be able to make certain that we use simple platforms like point-to-point texting and emails to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Packard.
I certainly believe we should leverage technology any way we can. I'm very proud to have been part of the effort under the current Secretary of State's administration to implement online voter registration through the Secretary of State's website. That's very important. It works very well. It's very secure, and I'm glad to have been a part of that. I would leverage technology further in the future, not only to enhance voter registration, but to enhance getting information out to the voters in terms of voter outreach, letting them know when elections are, or even when their district line changes and that sort of thing. Even a card that you normally get in the mail when you register to vote or you update, I would implement a process to be able to send them that as a PDF file so that they don't have to wait for the mail or even risk it getting lost in the mail. There's a lot that could be done, and I agree that we should leverage that technology, let people sign up for whatever services they would like to receive electronic information for, and be able to get that information to them through a means that they're comfortable with. A lot of people now, particularly the younger generation, and even I'm kind of older, but I do like getting my information through email or websites and that sort of thing too. We should expand that and leverage that, but only when the voters give us permission to use their information that way. We should not end up spamming them and giving them things they don't want. Maybe they want to keep their email clean and they don't really want to hear from a government official. So we should try to work on those things.
Mr. Horn, are you in agreement with the suggestions that were made? And also, where would you draw the line as far as where do we stop in regards to using social media to communicate with voters or other means of communication?
Well, those are things that I spoke to earlier. Certainly, I think when you talk about any intrusion upon the liberty of people to share their information with the public, we have to be locked down serious about that. It takes an opportunity to understand, we live in a blockchain world, for instance, where you're able to protect data just a little bit stronger than you have in the past. So we need to look at some of these military grade protections so that our information is not hacked or less than able to hack by those who have nefarious attitudes toward our voters.
Thank you. Mr. Pecker, would you like to add anything about where you would draw the line as far as communication with voters?
Well, I would certainly set boundaries, particularly in terms of protecting people's data. If people are looking online to get data about their voter registration file, then certainly that information needs to be secured, encrypted, and so forth to make sure that it's not hacked or intercepted. But when we're talking about general voter outreach, letting people know where their polling place is, letting them know when election day is going to be, we can certainly automate that process through email and through other means without their need for strong encryption and so forth.
Great. Well, I want to stay on the subject of social media. What would be your policy on the use of Secretary of State's official social media to inform the people of Alabama about the business of the Secretary of State versus using it to share the Secretary of State's personal opinions? And I'll let Mr. Beckert start.
Well, I strongly believe that government resources should not be used to promote anybody's personal opinions or personal beliefs. The social media of the Secretary of State's office should only be used to distribute information about the Secretary of State's office and what the Secretary of State's office is doing. I don't believe it should be used as a platform for any personal political agendas or party political agendas and so forth. As I told a group last week, I don't think that the Secretary of State's office needs to be an outpost for the Democratic Party. It doesn't need to be an outpost for the Republican Party or the Libertarian Party or any personal ventures that someone who is Secretary of State might be engaged in. I firmly believe that there are state laws that restrict the use of government property, and we should respect those. And whoever is in that office should not use it as a personal soapbox for whatever they happen to want to talk about.
Thank you, Mr. Horn.
Well, it's interesting, right? So on one hand, we want the voters to know exactly who is representing them. We want a face, hopefully it's my face, that sits there and say, I'm the guy who's going to protect your vote. I'm the guy who you can knock on my door and get answers to. That's critically important, I believe, because you want to take responsibility and you want to be the person that people can say, hey, listen, I know who he is. I know that he's someone that wants to help protect my vote and my issues. On the other side of the table, you should not be able to see that person more than the people of Alabama, because it's not about me. as your Secretary of State. It's about we. It's about all of us. And so for me, it's not important to have my face in a way that's going to promote me. If it's promoting me, it should be promoting the state. It's the people before me. It's me able to reach out to the people and say, I don't want you to see me. I want you to see us. And so that's more important to me. So I agree that we should not be having a platform so that people can use that platform for their own political purposes. The Secretary of State's office is not Democrat, it's not Republican, it's American. It's American. So those ideas of representing all people is what I would like to communicate, but I would like to communicate through the voice of the people and not through my face.
Great, thank you. I'd like to ask a question that we received from someone watching the live stream, and I want to invite the live audience that if you have a question that will apply to both candidates that you'd like to be able to ask, I'll have you come up to the microphone and get ready as they answer this question. So one of our watchers says, election security is of course important, but how do you plan to encourage citizens to continue to voice their vote when government makes it harder to vote? And so I will start with Mr. Horn.
So I'm hearing the question, could you repeat the question again, please?
Sure, it says election security is important, but how do you encourage citizens to continue to voice their opinions and show up to vote when this person believes it's becoming harder to vote?
Hey, listen, I think what's most important is that the Secretary of State has to be accessible. He's got to go to all the communities, all congressional districts, and hold quarterly meetings, monthly meetings, weekly meetings. Must show up at all the clubs, not Democratic clubs, not Republican clubs, so that people will be able to have access to the Secretary of State to voice their opinion. They should be able to have instant messaging services or any technology that they want on any platform they need to get their answers to the questions that they have. When it comes down to having relationships with the laws of the state, the Secretary of State should be a bridge with the legislators that represent that individual voter to be able to say, hey, what do we need to empower and inform the voter so that they can trust the vote process? I get it. I understand when voices are not heard. I've been in that position. I come from that legacy. And I want to do something that's never been done before, is open this office up to the people so they can be more transparent. If they don't like the laws, then they need to vote the people who make the laws out. And the people who make the laws, that said, it's the legislatures. So for me, it's really a stickler to say, I want to hear your voice. I want to be at programs like this. If someone wants your vote, they're running for Secretary of State, they should be sitting here and over there next to me and them. They're not here. They didn't show up. So if they don't show up now, how do you expect them to show up and represent you in the future? Those things are important. First thing in the morning, showing up, being accountable, being accessible, and have a heart-based sense of drive to hear people's pain and to try to help solve their problems.
Thank you. Mr. Packard?
And I apologize, could you state the question again, please?
Sure, it was election security is important, but also how do you encourage people to show up to vote, especially if they believe that it's becoming harder to vote?
Well, first and foremost, anybody who believes or feels that it's becoming harder to vote, I would like to talk to them and find out what they're encountering that's creating a difficulty for them. That's what I've been doing for the last 25 to 30 years, is talking to the public, hearing them. When people wanted an audit here in Alabama in the 2020 election, yes, I had to tell them we didn't have a state law that would allow for an audit, but I advised them what they could do if they wanted to get one, which was to talk to their state senator, talk to their state representative, and ask them to promote a bill. I don't know if my advice affected anybody, but I do know that sometime after that, Representative Haynes from North Alabama put in a bill that would have allowed an audit of 2020. I'm all for empowering voters. I'm all for giving them the information they need to vote. If there's something that we can't handle, I'm all for looking for a solution or advising them what they need to do so that they can get to the point where they can do what they want to do. Election security is important. There are things we have to do to make sure our elections are secure and people can have confidence in what's going on. But we certainly need to address the concerns of certain populations or even just individuals who are having a difficulty. I don't believe security and access to the polls are mutually exclusive objectives. I think we can do security and make sure everyone who has the legal right to vote is able to vote.
Great, thank you. We are going to have an audience member ask a question now.
Well, good evening. First of all, my name is Jada Hunter. I'm from Stanford University, where we've just founded our chapter of the League of Women Voters there, and here as a representative of them. So we're very excited to be here. And I just wanted to thank you both for your time this evening. It's been really educational listening to you both. So my question is, as a college student, I see many of my peers discount the importance of voting, and nationally, young people are a particularly difficult demographic to get to the polls. And what would you say to those who believe their vote doesn't count?
Great, and we'll let Mr. Packard start. Thank you.
I would tell those individuals what I've been telling people who don't vote for various reasons, particularly when they say they don't think their vote matters. I'll tell them what I've been telling folks for the last 25 years. If you don't vote, your vote will not matter. And you never know. If everyone who doesn't vote would actually turn out to vote, it's amazing what impact they may have on the state of Alabama, and if it's repeated across the country, the impact it could have on America as a whole. So I would encourage them to always avail themselves of their right to vote, get registered, vote. Of course, I would also say they need to get involved with government in other ways. Voting is very important, it's very fundamental, but there's a lot of ways that people can become involved in our system of government. But I would certainly tell them that we need you to vote. We appreciate the input that they can provide, college kids or younger people can provide, but we're not going to hear them if they don't vote.
Mr. Horn?
Hey, look, I'm someone who spends a lot of time with those college students. You know, I've spent many years planting seeds that their vote matters. I still do, whether it's in church or whether it's in ball fields, whether it's across the county, wherever you may see a young person. I want them to get involved in the process first so they can understand that your vote not only matters because you can do it, it matters because so many people wrestled, died, and agitated for that right to vote. In the historical Black colleges and universities, there's no reason why every kid who is eligible to vote, old enough to vote, does not vote. That's an offense to the people who came before them, who laid the bricks for them to go out and vote because their grandmother, great-grandmother could not vote. So we have to promote this sense of understanding that it's your civic duty. And that starts in high school. That starts in elementary school. It doesn't start when people get ready to vote. You have to have a visceral connection with high school coaches, with ministers, pastors, to be able to reach the young people and not just vote on vote day. I want to become vote for everything. Well, I want to be involved with the local PTA when they pick, the classes of government association for high schools. I want to be that Secretary of State that kids know from 6 years old to the time they're able to vote to say, he was the guy who taught me about voting. So educating that process with kids is critical for them to respect the vote.
Thank you, and thank you for the question.
Thank you both.
One more question from the live stream, and that question is, do we face security challenges with elections in Alabama? And I will let Mr. Horn begin.
Listen, right now, we see a world that's getting smaller, not bigger. We understand that there's great national security threats. We see Russia on the march, and we understand that every day China's trying to hack into our everyday computing systems. In Huntsville, Alabama, we build national defense systems. That's what we do. And ultimately, that's what we need to do with our voting. We must begin to lock down and harden our voter base. What happens if something simple when the lights go out on vote day? What happens when someone hacks the grid on vote day? So as a cybersecurity guy, I understand that we must start to take our voting very seriously when it comes down to protecting our vote, not just from the standpoint of protecting at the ballot box, but before we even get ready to vote, to know that your vote, your registration databases are not vulnerable. I think we're very, very vulnerable to cybersecurity concerns because we are not uniform in the platforms and the protection that we need. We need people with that kind of experience like myself, the people who are going to be in our circle, to know that we must protect these computer systems, these databases, these electric grid systems. Everything that's connected to voting is at a high risk right now. And until we are able to make certain that this SOS office also is an engineering office, is a national defense system office, then we can't get it done. And that's why I believe that we will be able to do so in our administration.
Thank you. Mr. Packard, do we face election security challenges in Alabama?
We do have election security and election integrity challenges in the state of Alabama. I don't know that we have any problems with our statewide voter file. So I want to put that on the record for you, because I don't want anybody going away from this meeting thinking that the statewide voter file has any risks at the moment or is high risk for people being able to hack into it. We are in a statewide dedicated system that is uniform across the state, and it has very high security already. One area where I do think we need to improve is with our voting machines. Right now, state law does not prohibit our voting machines from being connected to the internet. And although the Electronic Voting Committee, when I was a member of that committee, voted unanimously to not approve any voting machines in the state of Alabama that have any kind of remote connectivity through the internet or through cell phone networks, that decision was not based on state law. That was the Electronic Voting Committee deciding what they wanted to do to promote election integrity. We need that written into state law so that no one can come in and force remote connectivity to our voting machines. Because if you're going to hack machines, you have to know how to program them and you have to have access. The counties do a good job of securing the machines, but we need to make sure no one can get to them through remote connectivity. Lastly, we need to improve the penalties for violating our election laws. They're ridiculously low right now. $500 fine for littering, $500 fine for buying a vote. That needs to be changed.
Mr. Horn, do you think we need to change the penalties for violating the vote?
Absolutely. I think if you violate the vote, you should do the time, whatever that penalty is. Stiff penalties discourage people from cheating, from hacking. But once again, in the shrinking world that we live in, our threats are coming globally. People want to disrupt our elections. This is not a Democrat issue. It's not a Republican issue. And then we have to protect against people from the inside of the process, the bureaucrats who've been working forever in the system. So we need to make certain that we have an opportunity to make sure we know what the security risks are. That's all good.
Thank you. I have one final question before we allow you to make concluding remarks, and I think this is a yes or no question. And I will start with Mr. Packard. If you win the primary, will you agree to participate in a candidate forum with the Democratic Secretary of State candidate?
Well, as my campaign manager who's here tonight will tell you, nothing is ever yes or no with me. And I've already started an essay answer to your question. But yes, if I am the nominee of the Republican Party, I will participate in a debate or forum prior to the November election. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Horn, same question.
Yes.
All right, excellent. Thank you for answering a wide array of questions, and thank you to the audience for the questions. What I'd like to do now is give each of you 2 minutes to provide some concluding remarks. So I'm guessing there are things about your position that maybe we're unfamiliar with, we didn't ask you enough questions that we should have, and I want to give you the opportunity to share. And since we started with Mr. Horn, I'm going to let Mr. Packard go first.
Well, first again, let me thank the League of Women Voters for inviting us to participate in this event. I appreciate the people who are here in person, the people who are viewing from the comfort of their home or wherever they may be connecting to the internet from. And again, I thank the media for being here this evening as well. I've already talked about the importance of voting and its foundational aspect to our system of government. What I would like to talk about briefly before we go is that everyone's talking about election integrity. Everyone's talking election security. They want to prevent voter fraud. Not many people, in fact, so far on the campaign trail, I'm the only one talking about the penalties for violating election laws. I had an epiphany one day when I drove into Fort Payne and I saw a sign that said littering is unlawful and it's a $500 fine. Most election crimes in Alabama are Class C misdemeanors, which is a $500 fine or 3 months in jail. That is ridiculous. If you buy someone's vote, if you sell your vote and do similar things to that, that should be more than a $500 fine or 3 months in jail. Even the new bill that was passed to prohibit outside money from coming in to corrupt our election officials, they made that a Class D felony. That's a $3,000 fine or 6 months in jail. If people are bringing money in to corrupt our system, that is totally inadequate, and it only applies to the county or state election officials that take the money. It does not apply to the people pumping the money in to corrupt our system. That needs to be fixed, both in terms of who the law applies to and what the penalties are. I also believe that if you commit a felony election crime in Alabama, you should lose your right to vote until you get a full pardon from the State Board of Pardons and Paroles. Right now, although there are many felony crimes that lead to losing your voting rights, being convicted of a felony election crime does not affect your right to vote in the state of Alabama. That's a problem, that's a travesty, and that needs to be fixed. Thank you.
Mr. Horn?
I'd like to thank each of you for giving me the time, the energy, and the opportunity to speak and answer questions. Hey, listen, Alabama, we've got an opportunity to do something we've never done before. I walk through these great halls and I see all the pictures and all the suffragists and those who fought for the right to vote. For me, it's an opportunity to say to you, let's do something different. Let's swing from the outside. I want everyone's vote to come to our campaign to be able to say, listen, we need a new face. We need a new look. We don't need to be the embarrassment of our country. We don't need to be always against things. We need to be for the things that make Alabama stronger and better. I'm that guy. And I believe that all of us have an opportunity when we leave here tonight to make a decision. You can make a decision because you like their party. You can make your decision because you think they're good looking, because they're loud, whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, when you have an opportunity to show the world that this is a new Alabama, we've got a Secretary of State that represents all of Alabama. He doesn't just represent the North, the South, East, and West. He does not represent the Black or the white or the male or the female. He represents all of us. And that's something that I hope to look at those higher places and spaces. So those that have gone before us who agitated, for those of us who've gone to war and who came back, like the Tuskegee Airmen, who could not vote after defeating Hitler. I am that dream. We don't need to say, I have a dream. Collectively together, we are the future, which the future is now. Why not, Alabama? Choose the higher sensibilities of who we are chosen to be, that God wants us to be. One nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and thank you, League of Women Voters, for having me today.
Thank you to both Kristen Horn and Ed Packard, candidates for the Republican primary for the Secretary of State, for participating in this forum. Thanks for agreeing that should you win, we can have another forum, assuming that the Democratic candidate agrees as well. Thank you to the League of Women Voters of Alabama, Alabama Values, and the Department of Alabama Archives and History for allowing this event to happen. And do not forget to vote on May 24th in the primary race for Alabama. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is